Hello, everybody. This week's lessons, May 11th through the 15th. This past week, I had you guys do a little bit of a intro reading on the Vietnam War. Again, Cold War, big picture, idea of containment. The idea is it's okay where communism is currently located at in Soviet Union, I guess China. We can't let it spread to new areas. So hence, that's why we're going to fight in Korea. That's why we're going to fight in Vietnam. So it's really important to kind of keep that in mind. That's going to be our goals, not letting it spread. So the Vietnam War was a direct result of that containment foreign policy. So kind of keep that in mind how, the reasons for why we're fighting Vietnam is going to be different from why we're fighting World War II. And think about how that might cause some issues back at home. For the most part, most Americans are going to support us entering World War II. Why? We were attacked Pearl Harbor. Pearl Harbor is what brought us into the war. Adolf Hitler, evil. Mussolini, evil. So this is gonna be a little bit different. So next year we go into U.S. history. We'll spend 2 weeks on this, on the complexities of Vietnam and how this has caused a lot of problems back at home. So anyway, going forward a little bit, highlight some of the questions I had you guys do in the homework. So Vietnam War. So first of all, where is Vietnam located at? So here's China. Right through here, and then Vietnam is just below China, this orangey looking color, right along the coast of the South China Sea. And then you have Laos, you have Thailand, and you have Cambodia. So more of the story is this, the idea of something called a domino theory. So China is communist. So it's very similar to Europe that we feel like, okay, they're communist, that's fine where it's at. We can't let it spread because if you let it spread, look what's going to happen. If Vietnam turns communist now, that means Cambodia will more than likely turn communist. That means Thailand will most likely turn communist. That means Laos will more than likely turn communist. It'll be a domino effect. So that's why we put billions of dollars, wars, hundreds of thousands of U.S. lives at risk, and even tens of thousands more paying the ultimate sacrifice in dying in battle. For these ideals. So Vietnam, located in Southeast Asia, Vietnam is very rich in coal, iron ore, petroleum, mercury, and tin. So geographically and economically, it does have some value to the American interests that we can use to fuel our industrialization. All right. So, what are going to be some of the causes? So, as you guys kind of read in some of the things, guys, Vietnam has had a history of being controlled by a foreign leader for thousands of years. China controlled Vietnam for about 1,000 years. And then you had France, and then you eventually have Japan, then you'll have France again, and then you'll have the Americans. So, they've had a history for fighting for independence. So, starting in 1858, the French colonized Southeast Asia down here because they wanted to use it for resources. So results, from that point on, you started having nationalistic movements starting to occur in this region, especially in Vietnam. And then eventually, after World War II, you have a guy by the name of Ho Chi Minh, also known as Uncle Ho. I know, ha ha. That is going to start revitalizing that nationalistic movement, start uniting that nationalistic movement. And he's going to form the Communist Party. And then he's going to lead strikes, revolutions against the French to kick them out, to unite Southeast Asia, to unite Vietnam, to expel these leaders from France. Now, think back when we talk about imperialism. The French were installing their own schools. They were their language, their culture, their religions, and trying to impose those feelings and beliefs on the Vietnamese people. And you had guys like Ho Chi Minh and thousands of others that wanted to preserve their culture, preserve their traditions, and wanted the West and wanted Western influences out. So again, notice, he's communist. So think about right now on how that could be a problem during the Cold War. Americans don't like communists. Containment. So think about how we're going to be, and how Ho Chi Minh will eventually become an enemy of us. Although he respects Americans, and he actually wants American help, as we'll get to here in a minute. So World War II. During World War II, Japan seized control of Vietnam. So the French are gone. Japan will seize Vietnam. 1941. They're going to be happy to see the French gone because now the French are going to be worried about World War II. So the Vietnamese are still going to fear that the Japanese are going to, do very similar things, which they will. So as a result, Ho Chi Minh and others are going to find something called the Viet Minh. This is like the Independence League, the independence movement in Vietnam in the early 40s. So again, this is really prior to American involvement at this time, mostly Japanese. So now, once Japan loses World War II, now what's going to happen? Japan's going to have to surrender a lot of their colonial possessions, Vietnam. So Japan leaves Vietnam in 1945 after they're defeated. And guess what? The French are going to try to come back in and regain control of the colony. So again, Vietnam is basically being passed along from one foreign leader to the next. So, again, you have the independence movement in 1954. The French are going to be defeated. So there were things that led up to that. A lot of battles, a lot of blood, a lot of gore, that kind of thing, between the Viet Minh and Ho Chi Minh and his men against French forces. So long story short, it culminated in this battle called Dien Bien Phu that will result in a French defeat. Guys, this is going to be huge. You have big, bad France, a very strong military, a huge economic power, a huge military power, is going to lose to little tiny Vietnam. Think about what that's going to do to the Vietnamese confidence, and what that's going to do to Ho Chi Minh. Ho Chi Minh defeated the French. One of the first Asian countries to defeat a European power of this magnitude, especially in Vietnam. So Ho Chi Minh is going to soar to new heights. Popularity among Vietnam is going to be enormous when he defeats the French, gaining their independence. Now, American involvement, we'll talk about this next year in U.S., but ultimately the U.S. was supporting the French. Not militarily, but mostly through economics. We were basically paying for a lot of the French battles over there. But again, keep in mind, this is 1950s, containment, the Truman Doctrine, helping out countries that are wanting it, Marshall Plan, all these things. So Ho Chi Minh is not going to be a friend of ours. And all throughout this process, Ho Chi Minh was reaching out to American. He wrote Harry Truman, President Eisenhower, numerous letters trying for support, for peace. But because he was communist, we really didn't want to have much to do with him. So some causes. Rising communist sentiment in Vietnam leads U.S. President Eisenhower to describe the situation as a domino theory, as I described earlier. Vocabulary term, you know this. Domino theory means when the fall of one country to communism will lead to others. So when Laos, Thailand, so that's why Vietnam is so important. We need to control communism from spreading there. If we don't let it spread, that will stop communism from getting there. So, result. In 1954, we're going to have an agreement for the time being, where we're going to split Vietnam. This should sound eerily familiar to you guys. It's very similar to Korea, right? Korea was split at the 38th parallel. Vietnam will be split at the 17th parallel. And again, very similar to Korea. North Korea will be communist. North Vietnam is communist. South Korea is democratic. South Vietnam is democratic. So very similar in that regard and in that respect. So at this peace conference, Western powers, they've split up Vietnam. North is led by Ho Chi Minh and communist forces. They will also be supported by the Soviet Union and China. South Vietnam will be anti-communist, democratic, and they're going to place Ngo Dinh Diem in power there. He's kind of the best of the worst choices, meaning that he wasn't really necessarily qualified, wasn't really well liked, but he backed American policy, and he was seen as necessarily like a puppet, essentially, of the United States. So anyway, kind of moving on. So the U.S. and France will support Diem. All right, so sorry about that on my video recorder. Okay, so the Geneva Accords. At this conference where they split up Vietnam, citizens in North and South Vietnam had 300 days. So, for instance, if you lived in North Vietnam and you do not want to live under a communist rule, communist policy, you were given 300 days if you wanted to move to the South. And vice versa. If you lived in South Vietnam and you wanted to move up to the North and be controlled by Ho Chi Minh and communism, then you could have 300 days to move, without any penalties, restrictions, whatever. Thousands of communists, the Viet Minh, are going to stay in South Vietnam. They're going to cause a bunch of ruckus, a bunch of chaos there. Ngo Dinh Diem, South Vietnam, he's going to be a very poor leader, very unpopular in South Vietnam, although he's supported by the Americans. But the reason why he was unpopular was because he was really out of touch. He was a rich Catholic that controlled the country that was poor and that were Buddhists. And he's going to arrest a lot of Buddhists. You see this picture right here. This is a picture of Quang Duc. He's a Buddhist monk who's going to set himself on fire in protest of Diem's policies of arresting monks and trying to destroy Buddhism in Vietnam. The Viet Cong, very important. This is one of the enemies who we're going to fight. So the Viet Cong were communist guerrilla fighters in South Vietnam. So they were, to what I said before, they were communists that lived in South Vietnam, that stayed there, that was causing all this ruckus. They were trying to overthrow the South Vietnamese government and turn them communist. We were there to help South Vietnam, but these Viet Cong members were fighting us. So the Kennedy administration are going to lose faith in Diem, not enough reforms and freedom, eventually where Diem will be killed. So you kind of see two here. President Eisenhower in 1960, we're going to have roughly around 600 military advisors in Vietnam, very small force. Notice what happens in 1963 under John F. Kennedy, 16,000. So we go about 10,000, about 10,000 more. 15,400 soldiers increase under JFK. So you're going to start seeing that slow escalation of troops. So the spark. By August of 1964, the U.S. needed justification for more presence. So those small amount of soldiers, those 16,000 soldiers, was not enough. The Viet Cong was a very strong enemy. North Vietnam, strong enemy. They were strong-willed. They were not going to surrender. They were using guerrilla tactics, hit and run, hiding underground, trying to fight us. We needed more troops. Problem is, we needed reason to do so. So something that happened in the Gulf of Tonkin. There are basically, guys, our ships were attacked in the Gulf of Tonkin. It was a port outside of Vietnam. The ship was attacked, and although one of the attacks was never really proven that it actually happened, but President Johnson, after JFK is killed, President Lyndon B. Johnson is going to use this attack as a reason for why we need to have more troops over there. And use this event to kind of bypass Congress a little bit. Again, we'll talk about that next year. So on August 5th, 1964, Congress passed the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution that will authorize the president to use more war power. So it'll give the president the ability to expand the war. Very dangerous. The president now can bypass Congress. You don't really need a declaration of war to go to war. The president will have the ability to pick and choose and make war decisions without congressional approval. So as you guys see here, when that happened, President Johnson is going to increase troops by 500,000 troops by 1968. Again, president going above Congress to do that. So strategy for the war, the United States. The U.S. is going to have superior firepower. We are the country that's bigger, stronger military, more technologically advanced. So our goal is going to be to use our firepower to will the enemy to surrender. We're going to use our airstrikes, our bombs, to submission, use search and destroy missions. We're going to go in village to village and set it on fire and until every village is clear of Viet Cong. We're going to set up blockades. But for South Vietnam or Vietnamese, their advantage there is going to be they're going to use guerrilla tactics. You can't see who they are. You can't see where they're hiding. They're going to use the jungle to their advantage. They're going to hide underground. They're going to use the terrain to their advantage. They're going to pick when the fights are going to be and where using those tactics. So are the bombs going to matter if they're hiding underground? No. They're going to fight at night. They're going to use that to their advantage. And their heart, their will to fight. You can't underestimate that. So there's became an Operation Rolling Thunder came about, where we're going to start basically just bombing them. As I said, think about the consequences of this. We're going to use more bombs in Vietnam than we do in all of World War II. So think about how this is going to come back to bite us in the butt. All these bombs that we're going to drop is going to destroy Vietnamese land. So if you're a farmer, your land's going to be destroyed. Your ability to eat and survive and pay for your family's expenses are going to be gone. You're going to be torching their lands. Plus, they're hiding underground. So the damage is going to be very, very minimal. All right, so I'm going to be going to a new video. This is going to be it, so there'll be 2 videos for this.